You know, there's something rather curious about the way power actually works in this world. And most people have gotten it completely backwards. We've been taught that power comes from speaking up, from making yourself heard, from asserting your position. We live in a world that worships noise, that mistakes volume for authority, that believes the loudest voice must be speaking truth. But watch what actually happens. The more we explain, the less we are understood. The more we shout, the more we are ignored. It's as if the universe is playing a trick on us, rewarding exactly the opposite of what we've been taught. And here's what's strange. The people who talk the most understand the least. The ones who never stop speaking have forgotten how to listen, even to themselves. But there are others, quiet ones, who move through the world like they know a secret. And here's the thing, they do. They don't argue. They don't explain themselves. They don't try to convince anyone of anything. And yet somehow, they always seem to be 3 steps ahead. They see what's coming before it arrives. They understand people before those people understand themselves. And they do all of this without saying a word. So what if the real power, the kind that actually changes things, comes not from speaking, but from seeing, not from convincing others, but from understanding them so completely that you can move through their world like a ghost, unseen, but always present? Let me tell you what's really happening here. Because the conscious soul, the awakened person, they've discovered something that the sleeping masses have completely missed. They've discovered that most people are not actually living their lives. They're living out patterns, scripts they inherited from their parents, their culture, their fears. They are following invisible instructions written long before they were born, repeating behaviors they never chose, playing out stories they never questioned. And they've been doing it for so long, so automatically, that they think this is simply who they are. And here's the beautiful thing. Once you see the program, once you understand the pattern, you can predict exactly what someone will do before they do it. Not because you're psychic, but because you've seen this movie before. You know how it ends. You know what happens in the second act. You know which character will betray which will have the breakdown, which will learn nothing and repeat the same mistakes again. Think about it this way. Imagine you're watching a chess game between 2 players. One player is thinking 3 moves ahead. The other is only thinking about the current move. Who's going to win? Obviously the one who can see further. But here's the thing. The one thinking 3 moves ahead doesn't need to announce their strategy. They don't need to explain what they're doing. They just quietly move their pieces and watch the inevitable unfold. This is what the conscious soul does in life. They see the patterns, they understand the game, and they move accordingly. While everyone else is busy talking, explaining, defending, arguing, the conscious soul is simply watching. And in that watching, they gain an advantage that no amount of clever talking could ever provide. So let me share with you the 5 ways this happens. The 5 ways conscious souls move through the world with a power that words could never give them. The first way conscious souls outsmart everyone is they see through the performance. You see, most people are performing all the time. They're playing roles. The successful businessman, the devoted mother, the tough guy, the victim, the hero. These are costumes, masks, characters they've created. And they've worn them for so long that they've forgotten they're acting. But the conscious soul sees the actor beneath the costume. They see the fear beneath the confidence. They see the neediness beneath the generosity. They see the manipulation beneath the kindness. And this seeing gives them an enormous advantage, because while everyone else is reacting to the performance, the conscious soul is responding to the reality. I once knew a man who ran a very successful business. He had this ability to read people instantly. Not what they said, but what they meant. Not what they showed, but what they hid. And he would sit in meetings, perfectly quiet, while everyone else talked and talked and talked. And by the end of the meeting, he knew exactly who was lying, who was afraid, who was trying to manipulate the situation. He didn't need to say a word. He just watched. And then he made his decisions, based on what he saw, not what he heard. His competitors thought he was lucky. They thought he had some kind of magic touch. But there was no magic. There was only clarity. He saw clearly, while everyone else was lost in the fog of their own performances. Here's what most people don't understand. When you are performing, you're blind. You're so busy maintaining your mask that you can't see anyone else's. You're so focused on controlling how you appear that you miss what's actually happening. But when you stop performing, when you simply be, suddenly you can see everything. The masks become transparent. The games become obvious. And you realize you've been living in a theater where everyone is acting, but no one is watching. The second way is they understand that silence is a weapon. Now, when I say weapon, I don't mean something violent or cruel. I mean a tool, an instrument of power. You see, most people are terrified of silence. They fill every gap with words, with noise, with chatter. Because silence makes them uncomfortable. It forces them to be alone with their thoughts, and their thoughts are often not very pleasant company. But the conscious soul has made peace with silence. They've sat in it long enough to know it's not empty. It's full of awareness, full of presence, full of power. And when they choose to be silent in the conversation, something interesting happens. The other person starts to fill the silence. They start talking more, explaining more, revealing more. They become uncomfortable, and in their discomfort, they show their hand. Think about a negotiation. The person who speaks first usually loses. Why? Because they've revealed their position, their needs, their desperation. But the person who waits, who listens, who lets the silence stretch until the other person can't bear it anymore, they gain information. They learn what the other person really wants, what they're afraid of, what they're willing to accept. Conscious soul uses silence like this all the time. Not manipulatively, not cruelly, but simply because they understand that listening is more powerful than speaking, that watching is more informative than performing, that in the space between words, truth reveals itself. I remember sitting with a teacher once who barely spoke. Students would come with their questions, their problems, their desperate need for answers. And he would just sit there, looking at them with these calm eyes. The silence would stretch. Seconds would become minutes. And the student would start talking, filling the void. And in their talking, they would answer their own question. They would solve their own problem. And the teacher never said a word. He simply held the space. He simply allowed the silence to do its work. This is what conscious souls understand. Silence is not the absence of communication. It's the deepest form of it. The third way is they never defend themselves. This one is crucial. When you're asleep, when you're identified with your ego, you feel the need to defend yourself constantly. Someone criticizes you, you must explain. Someone misunderstands you, you must correct them. Someone attacks your character, you must prove them wrong. But the conscious soul has realized something extraordinary. There is nothing to defend. Because the self that others are attacking, that small ego self, it's not real anyway. It's just a story, a collection of thoughts and memories and preferences. and you cannot damage a story by talking about it. So when someone criticizes the conscious soul, what happens? Nothing. They don't argue, they don't explain, they don't defend. They simply let the criticism pass through them like wind through an open window. And this drives people absolutely mad, because the whole point of criticism is to get a reaction, to make the other person defensive, to pull them into a fight. But when there's no reaction, when there's no defense, the criticism has nowhere to land. It just dissipates into the air. And here's what's brilliant about this. By not defending themselves, the conscious soul actually appears more credible, more trustworthy, more powerful. Because defense implies guilt. Defense implies there's something to hide. But when someone simply stands there, calm and unbothered by accusations, people start to wonder. Maybe the accusations are false. Maybe this person really is who they appear to be. Think about water. You can shout at water, curse it, accuse it of being too wet. And what does the water do? Nothing. It remains water. It doesn't defend its wetness. It doesn't argue for its right to flow. It simply continues being what it is. And eventually the person shouting gets tired and walks away. The water was never threatened. The water was never in danger. The water simply was. This is the conscious soul. I'm defended because there's nothing to defend. I'm shaken because there's nothing to shake. Present because there's nowhere else to be. The fourth way is they let people reveal themselves. The conscious soul understands something that most people never learn. Everyone tells you exactly who they are, not through their words, but through their actions. Not through their promises, but through their patterns. Not through what they say they value, but through what they actually do when no one important is watching. So the conscious soul doesn't interrogate people. They don't demand explanations. They don't try to figure out if someone is trustworthy or honest or genuine. They simply watch. They give people enough rope, as the saying goes. And people, being people, will always show you their true nature, if you're patient enough to wait for it. How does someone treat the waiter? How do they speak about people who aren't in the room? How do they behave when they think no one is paying attention? What makes them laugh? What makes them angry? The conscious soul notices all of this, not with judgment, but with clarity. And based on what they see, they make their decisions about who to trust, who to avoid, who to let close, and who to keep at a distance. Meanwhile, everyone else is listening to words, believing promises, falling for performances. And then they're shocked, absolutely shocked, when people turn out to be different than they claim. But the conscious soul is never shocked, because they were watching the whole time. They saw it coming. There's a peculiar kind of patience in this. Not the patience of waiting for something to happen, but the patience of allowing what is already happening to reveal itself. Like watching a photograph develop in a dark room. You don't rush it. You don't force it. You simply wait, and the image appears all on its own. The conscious soul has this patience. They don't need to know everything immediately. They don't need to figure people out in the first conversation. They are content to watch, to observe, to let time do its work. And time always reveals the truth. Always. The fifth way, and perhaps the most powerful, is they've learned to be comfortable with being misunderstood. This is the ultimate freedom. Most people are enslaved by the need to be understood, to be seen correctly, to have others know their true intentions. And so they exhaust themselves, explaining, clarifying, defending, trying desperately to control how others perceive them. But the conscious soul has let go of this need. They understand that how others see them is not their responsibility, that everyone is looking through their own lens, their own filters, their own projections. And no amount of explanation will change that. So they don't try. Someone thinks they're arrogant? Fine. Someone thinks they're weak? Okay. Someone completely misreads their intentions. So be it. The conscious soul knows who they are. And that knowing is not dependent on anyone else's opinion. This is not indifference. This is freedom. Freedom from the exhausting need to manage everyone's perception. Freedom from the prison of other people's thoughts. And here's what happens when you stop caring about being misunderstood. You become unpredictable. And unpredictability is power. When people can't figure you out, when they can't put you in a box, when their usual strategies for manipulation and control don't work on you, they become uncertain. And in their uncertainty, you have room to move. Think about it. The person who desperately needs to be liked can be controlled through approval and disapproval. The person who needs to be right can be controlled through argument. The person who needs to be understood can be controlled through misunderstanding. But the person who needs none of these things, they cannot be controlled at all. Now let me be very clear about something. This is not about being cold or distant or uncaring. The conscious soul often cares more deeply than anyone else. But they care without attachment. They love without needing to be loved back. They give without needing recognition. They act without needing approval. This is the great paradox. The less you need from others, the more power you have in every interaction. The less you try to control how you're perceived, the more influence you actually have. The less you speak, the more people listen when you finally do speak. I've watched this play out countless times. The person in the room who talks the least is often the one everyone remembers. The person who doesn't argue their point is often the one whose point carries the most weight. The person who doesn't defend themselves is often the one people trust most. Why? Because there's something in us that recognizes authenticity when we see it. We can sense when someone is performing and when someone is simply being. We can feel the difference between someone who needs our approval and someone who is complete without it. And we are drawn to that completeness like moths to a flame. So here's what the conscious soul knows that everyone else has forgotten. The game of life is not won by shouting the loudest, or arguing the best, or convincing the most people. The game is won by seeing clearly, by understanding deeply, by moving wisely. And all of this happens in silence, in observation, in the vast space of awareness that watches everything, but clings to nothing. While everyone else is busy talking, the conscious soul is busy seeing. While everyone else is defending their position, the conscious soul has no position to defend. While everyone else is trying to outsmart each other with words, the conscious soul has already outsmarted them all by simply being present. And the beautiful irony is that they're not trying to outsmart anyone. They're not playing that game at all. They are simply living from a different level of consciousness. A level where the usual games of ego and competition and proving yourself look like children playing pretend. So if you find yourself in a world of noise, and you're the quiet one, if you're surrounded by people defending themselves and you have nothing to defend, if everyone else is trying to convince each other and you're simply watching, know this: you're not missing out. You're not failing to engage. You're not being passive or weak. You're being conscious. And consciousness, real consciousness, doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to prove itself. It simply is. The conscious soul doesn't outsmart others by being clever. They outsmart others by being awake. And that awakeness? It's not a skill you develop. It's what remains when you stop performing, stop defending, stop explaining. It's what you are when you finally stop trying to be anything at all. While everyone else is busy talking, you're busy seeing. And in that seeing, you've already won a game you were never playing. Because silence doesn't just reveal truth. Silence is truth. And truth, my friends, needs no voice to make it real.